Jacob FATU goes crazy after USOS defeat. YouTube script. Jacob FATU just suffered the most devastating mental breakdown in WWE history, and the horrifying footage of his complete psychological collapse will make your blood run cold. What happened after watching the USOS get brutally destroyed by Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker wasn't just anger, it was the complete shattering of a man's sanity as he screamed, "I want revenge," while security desperately tried to prevent him from committing actual murder on live television. If you think you've seen wrestlers lose their temper before, you're about to witness something that will redefine your understanding of what uncontrolled rage looks like when it consumes someone's soul. The Samoan werewolf didn't just get upset about his family's defeat, he underwent a terrifying transformation that proves he's become genuinely dangerous to everyone around him. The moment Jacob FATU realized his beloved cousins were being systematically dismantled by two men who showed zero respect for bloodline legacy, something inside him snapped so violently that even hardened WWE veterans were genuinely frightened by what they witnessed. The look of pure homicidal fury in his eyes as he watched helplessly from backstage will haunt you for weeks. You want to talk about crossing lines that trigger violent consequences? Reed and Breakker didn't just defeat the USOS, they humiliated the most sacred family in professional wrestling and awakened a monster who is now planning their complete and utter destruction with the methodical precision of a serial killer. The match itself was already a nightmare for Bloodline supporters. Watching G and Jimmy USO, two of the most accomplished tag team wrestlers in history, getting ragdolled by Reed and Breakker like they were enhancement talent was absolutely sickening. But Jacob FATU's reaction to witnessing his family's destruction was 1,000 times more terrifying than the actual defeat. The security footage from backstage shows the exact moment when Jacob FATU's composure completely disintegrated. 1 second he was the composed family enforcer watching his cousins compete, and the next second he was a raging psychopath throwing furniture and screaming death threats that had to be censored from the broadcast. "They're dead. They're both dead. I'm going to kill them." Those weren't the words of someone playing a character, those were the genuine threats of a man who had completely lost touch with reality and was planning actual violence against Reed and Breakker. Here's a question that's going to reveal just how unhinged this situation has become. Did you notice how Jacob FATU's pupils were completely dilated during his breakdown, suggesting he was in a genuine state of psychological crisis? The most terrifying aspect of FATU's meltdown was how quickly he went from watching the match normally to planning detailed revenge scenarios. Within minutes of the USO's defeat, he was describing exactly how he would break every bone in Reed's body and make Breakker beg for mercy before ending his career forever. The clinical precision with which he detailed his revenge fantasies while still in a state of uncontrolled rage was absolutely chilling. This wasn't just emotional outburst, this was a calculated psychopath methodically planning the systematic destruction of two human beings. But the most disturbing moment came when Jacob FATU grabbed a steel chair and started practicing the exact strikes he planned to use on Reed and Breakker. Security personnel reported that he was hitting the chair against concrete walls with such force that sparks were flying, all while muttering their names like a mantra of violence. The physical preparation for his revenge attack while still in the throes of his psychological breakdown proves that Jacob FATU has crossed the line from wrestling persona into genuine mental instability. This man is preparing for war, not sports entertainment. Quick question for the psychology experts: when you see someone practicing violence while in an altered mental state, what does that typically indicate about their intentions and likelihood of following through? The footage of WWE officials desperately trying to calm Jacob FATU down is absolutely heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. Multiple executives were pleading with him to remember that this was just a wrestling match, but FATU kept screaming, "This is about family. This is about respect." They crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. The cultural significance of what Reed and Breakker did during their victory celebration has clearly triggered something primal and dangerous in Jacob FATU's psyche. Their disrespectful gestures toward Samoan traditions weren't just poor sportsmanship, they were acts of cultural warfare that have driven the Samoan werewolf to the brink of actual violence. But here's where this situation gets exponentially more dangerous. Jacob FATU has apparently been studying Reed and Breakker's match footage obsessively, not to improve his own wrestling ability, but to identify the most effective ways to inflict maximum physical damage on both men. The most chilling evidence of his deteriorating mental state came when security found detailed notes in his locker room describing Reed and Breakker's injury histories, weak points, and vulnerable body parts. This isn't preparation for a wrestling match, this is reconnaissance for an assassination attempt. Here's another question that exposes how serious this has become. Do you think WWE security should be treating Jacob FATU's threats as legitimate concerns for performer safety rather than just storyline development? The investigation into what triggered such an extreme reaction from Jacob FATU reveals that Reed and Breakker's post-match celebration included specific mockery of Samoan warrior traditions that hold sacred meaning for the Inoue family. The cultural desecration has transformed this from a wrestling rivalry into a blood feud with generational implications. The most disturbing detail from witness accounts is that Jacob FATU was apparently making phone calls to family back in the islands immediately after his breakdown, reportedly asking for traditional permission to handle Reed and Breakker the old way. The implications of involving extended family in his revenge plans are absolutely terrifying. But perhaps the most shocking revelation is that other members of the bloodline are now afraid of Jacob FATU's mental state. Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa have reportedly been trying to stage an intervention, but FATU has rejected all attempts at reasoning and declared his intention to handle the situation alone. The family meeting footage that leaked shows Roman desperately trying to remind Jacob that we handle business in the ring, not in the streets, but FATU's response was to grab Roman by the shirt and scream they disrespected our ancestors. They mocked everything we stand for. This requires blood. The invocation of ancestral honor and traditional justice shows just how deeply Reed and Breaker's actions have affected Jacob Fatu's psychological stability. He's no longer operating within the boundaries of professional wrestling, he's functioning according to ancient codes of family honor that demand violent retribution. Here's a cultural question for the Samoan wrestling experts: how significant is it when someone from the Anoa'i family invokes ancestral honor as justification for revenge? The most ominous development is that Jacob Fatu has stopped making public threats and has gone completely silent about his revenge plans. WWE security experts know that when dangerous individuals transition from emotional outbursts to calculating silence, that's when they become most unpredictable and potentially violent. The transformation from screaming rage to cold calculation is perhaps the most frightening aspect of this entire situation. Jacob Fatu has apparently moved beyond emotional reaction into strategic planning mode, which makes him infinitely more dangerous to everyone involved. But the most infuriating aspect of this situation is how Reed and Breaker are responding to Jacob Fatu's genuine psychological crisis. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of his mental breakdown, they've been posting social media content mocking his threats and treating his pain like entertainment. The casual dismissal of someone's obvious mental health emergency reveals Reed and Breaker to be either incredibly naive about the dangerous situation they've created or complete sociopaths who enjoy triggering psychological breakdowns in their colleagues. Their latest Instagram posts show them laughing about Jacob Fatu's temper tantrum and making jokes about how Samoan tough guys can't handle real competition. The level of cultural insensitivity and psychological cruelty they're displaying is absolutely disgusting. Here's a question about professional responsibility: should Reed and Breaker be held accountable for deliberately triggering and then mocking someone's obvious mental health crisis? The most terrifying intelligence report from WWE Security reveals that Jacob Fatu has been asking detailed questions about Reed and Breaker's travel schedules, hotel arrangements, and personal routines. This suggests his revenge planning extends far beyond just confronting them during televised programming. The level of obsession and surveillance Jacob Fatu is displaying raises serious concerns about potential stalking behavior that could escalate into genuine criminal activity. When someone becomes this fixated on revenge, they often lose the ability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence of his psychological deterioration is the discovery that Jacob Fatu has been having detailed conversations with imaginary versions of Reed and Breaker. Security footage shows him arguing with empty air, rehearsing the confrontations he's planning, and even negotiating with hallucinations. The presence of auditory and visual hallucinations during his revenge planning sessions suggests that Jacob Fatu's mental breakdown has progressed to the point where he may genuinely be unable to distinguish between his fantasies and reality. This makes him exponentially more dangerous to everyone around him. The psychiatric evaluation that WWE secretly ordered for Jacob Fatu reportedly recommended immediate intervention and possible hospitalization, but company executives are concerned about the legal and financial implications of forcing treatment on a performer who hasn't actually committed any crimes yet. Here's an ethical question for the corporate responsibility experts: should WWE prioritize performer safety over potential lawsuits when dealing with someone who is clearly experiencing a severe mental health crisis? The most chilling moment from recent surveillance footage shows Jacob Fatu practicing his revenge speech in front of a mirror, complete with detailed descriptions of exactly what he plans to do to Reed and Breaker when he finally gets his hands on them. The level of detail and preparation is absolutely terrifying. The methodical nature of his planning, combined with his obvious psychological instability, creates the perfect storm for a potentially catastrophic incident that could destroy multiple careers and possibly result in serious criminal charges. But the most shocking development is that Jacob Fatu has apparently started reaching out to underground fighting contacts, reportedly asking about settling scores outside the system and finding people who understand real violence. The implications of involving actual criminals in his revenge fantasy are absolutely terrifying. The investigation into these contacts reveals that Jacob Fatu has been in communication with individuals who specialize in off-the-books problem solving and have histories of violence that extend far beyond professional wrestling. This suggests his revenge plans may involve genuinely dangerous people. The most ominous warning came from a former associate who contacted WWE Security anonymously: Jacob's not playing games anymore. He's talking to people who solve problems permanently, and he's got the money to make Reed and Breaker disappear if he wants to. Someone needs to stop this before it goes too far. Here's a final question for the safety experts: at what point does WWE have a legal obligation to involve law enforcement in protecting Reed and Breaker from Jacob Fatu's escalating threats? The countdown to Jacob Fatu's revenge has officially entered its final phase, and the evidence suggests that Reed and Breaker have no idea how serious this situation has become. The Samoan werewolf has promised that they will pay for humiliating his family, and based on his current mental state, that payment may be far more severe than anyone anticipates. When Jacob FATU finally implements his revenge plan, the wrestling world will witness either the most intense storyline in WWE history or the most tragic real-life incident ever captured on camera. Either way, Reed and Breaker's lives will never be the same again.